While Americans today consistently rank Abraham Lincoln as the greatest president of the United States, Americans in 1864 were not so sure. During the election of that year, the Democratic opponent, George B. McClellan, was willing to give up the cause of emancipation for a quicker Union victory. Republicans were divided as to whether Lincoln was doing enough to abolish slavery and ensure that the Confederacy would be fairly punished. To address these concerns and attract new voters, Lincoln replaced his current vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, with the risky choice of Andrew Johnson, a war Democrat from Tennessee. Lincoln ultimately did receive his party's nomination by bringing together several factions into what would briefly be known as the National Union Party. On June 9, 1864, Lincoln accepted his party's nomination and addressed the National Union League, saying, "I can only say, in response to the kind words of your chairman, that I am very grateful for the renewed confidence which has been accorded to me by the National League." Lincoln goes on to say that he may not be the best man for the job, acknowledging the opposition he faced within his own party and that he would continue to face against a Democratic nominee. Lincoln had a history of belittling his own self-worth, but in the election of 1864, he had good reason to be nervous about his chances for re-election. With his usual modesty, Lincoln replied to the National Union League upon his nomination, saying, "I have not permitted myself, gentlemen, to conclude that I am the best man in the country." This wasn't the first time Lincoln publicly expressed humility during a campaign. In 1832, when running for a seat in the Illinois House of Representatives, Lincoln wrote in his campaign speech that if the voters see fit to keep me in the background, I have been too familiar with disappointments to be very much chagrined. Granted, this was the very beginning of Lincoln's political career, giving him good reason to anticipate a loss. Yet in 1859, after nearly 3 decades of relative political success, Lincoln wrote to a newspaper editor in an autobiographical sketch, "There is not much of it, for the reason, I suppose, that there is not much of me," a striking comment from the man who would soon become the 16th President of the United States. So in examining his 1864 reply to the nominating convention, it doesn't come as a surprise when he questioned whether he was the best man in the country for the position. Whether Lincoln was actually as modest as he appeared is unclear, but the political climate of 1864 gave him real reason to doubt his success in the upcoming election. As the nominating convention neared, his own Republican Party was splintering. Radicals in the party questioned his commitment to political equality for the newly freed slaves. In addition, they thought his 10% plan was far too lenient on the Confederacy, countering his plan with a bill that would require 50% of Southern voters to swear loyalty to the Union. His own Treasury Secretary, Salmon P. Chase, had short-lived plans to run against him, and one of his former generals, John C. Fremont, also made a bid to oppose Lincoln. Ultimately, Lincoln was granted his party's nomination. So when he said to the National Union League upon his nomination, "I am very grateful for the renewed confidence which has been accorded to me, both by the convention and by the National League," there is no doubt that he meant it. He knew the opposition he was up against, and that there was a very real possibility that he would not be chosen. Solidifying the support of his own party wasn't Lincoln's only obstacle during the election. He faced growing discontent from both peace and war Democrats, who believed Lincoln abandoned his original plan in the war, saving the Union, to making it a crusade against slavery. In August 1864, the Democrats selected former Union General George B. McClellan as their nominee. Going against his party's platform of ending the war immediately and negotiating a settlement, McClellan promised to continue fighting and preserve the Union at all costs. Preserving the Union for McClellan meant giving up the cause of emancipation, which would bring a quicker end to the war. McClellan's popularity grew as many Unionists agreed with the former general that Lincoln had gone too far in abolishing slavery. For these men, McClellan became an alternative to Lincoln, who promised to end the war with the Union intact, adding to the uncertainty that Lincoln was destined for a second term. Lincoln was well aware of the political obstacles he faced in the election. In expressing his gratitude to the National League delegation, he said, "I am not insensible at all to the personal compliment there is in this, yet I do not allow myself to believe that any but a small portion of it is appropriated as a personal compliment." Lincoln doubted that he alone could win this election. It was in this atmosphere of political rivalries and self-doubt that Lincoln chose Andrew Johnson, a war Democrat from Tennessee, as his running mate. Lincoln recognized his vulnerability during the war and saw Johnson as an opportunity to gain support from the opposite side of the political aisle. Lincoln's choice of Johnson went far beyond presidential candidates choosing a running mate with different political and regional backgrounds to appeal to a broader constituency. While Johnson was a Unionist like Lincoln, he was also a Democrat, was from a secessionist state, and had been a slaveholder himself. Replacing his current vice president, Hannibal Hamlin, who opposed slavery and encouraged Lincoln to issue the Emancipation Proclamation, shows that Lincoln was very concerned he could lose the election over the slavery issue. This was not the first time that Lincoln made an ill-fated political decision in an attempt to garner support from opposing factions. Historian Brooks D. Simpson chastises Lincoln for choosing political generals during the war, professional politicians before the war who possessed little, if any, military training or experience. Simpson accuses Lincoln of retaining incompetent generals in order to appease political constituencies, an accusation that could easily be applied to his choice of Johnson as his running mate. In both cases, Lincoln sacrificed party loyalty in an attempt to attract voters, revealing the self-doubt he expressed in his reply to the National Union delegation that he alone could win the election. Lincoln's response to his nomination by the National Union Party reveals the obstacles he faced in his re-election campaign and his concern that he would be re-elected. His Republican Party was fractured, and he faced severe opposition from the Democrats, creating a need for a more inclusive National Union Party. Still, he was worried he would not be re-elected on his own. He knew he needed broader support, prompting the decision to appoint Johnson as his running mate. After all the worry and political maneuvering, however, Lincoln won in a landslide victory, earning 212 electoral votes to McClellan's 21. Would he have won without Johnson on the ticket? Were the Democrats mounting enough of an opposition to defeat an incumbent president during the middle of a war? It's impossible to say. But in July 1864, Lincoln did not take victory for granted.